To build a permanent continental-scale state using only agrarian-era technology is a mathematical and logistical anomaly. Without modern telecommunications or mechanized transport, the friction of distance alone should tear a sprawling empire apart. By the 2nd century, Rome's borders encompassed 5 million square kilometers, from Britain to the Euphrates. This domain housed up to 100 million people, a quarter of the human population. To govern this entire network outside Italy, Rome dispatched only 160 officials annually. A message from the capital to a frontier governor in Syria could take weeks to arrive by horse and ship. Every order, tax receipt, and military directive had to fight through immense physical latency. Rome survived for 5 centuries because it functioned as a masterclass in systems engineering, successfully scaling a city-state's logic to govern the known world. The original Roman Republic was an operating system designed strictly for a city-state. It relied on annually elected magistrates and a senate that could gather in one room, a system mathematically incapable of processing the logistical load of a Mediterranean empire. By the 1st century BC, this administrative overload manifested as violent factionalism. Powerful military commanders controlled legions that owed loyalty to them personally, rather than to the state, resulting in decades of brutal civil war. The decisive rupture came through the perpetual dictatorship of Julius Caesar, and following his assassination, the absolute victory of his adopted son, Octavian, who seized total control of the Roman world. In 27 BC, Octavian took the title Augustus and inaugurated the Principate, the first epoch of Roman imperial history, characterized by rule under a single emperor. He carefully preserved the visual forms of the old republic while installing a permanent autocratic administrative engine beneath it. Centralizing power into the hands of a single executive was a strict administrative necessity. The republican network had failed. Autocracy was required to prevent the massive Roman system from tearing itself apart. We can map the Roman state as a 3-tiered system stack. The foundation is Layer 1, the hardware. Augustus replaced citizen militias with a permanent professional force. He established 30 dedicated legions, creating an active military apparatus of 300,000 full-time soldiers. These legions operated as dual-purpose tools. They were combat units, but also the state's primary engineers, physically building the infrastructure that connected the empire. They constructed highly engineered road networks to eliminate logistical friction. Built with cambered surfaces, meaning the roads were curved for drainage, and graded compaction layers, these stone arteries knitted the provinces together for military deployment and commerce. By the reign of Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century, the hardware strategy pivoted toward a policy of strict physical containment. Hadrian commissioned building programs to demarcate the edge of the Roman operational grid. Hadrian's Wall served as a hard, fortified boundary against unconquered populations. The Roman military physically paved and enclosed the operational motherboard of the empire, converting raw territory into a functional logistical grid. Layer 2 is the Operian system, the network of economic incentives running on top of physical infrastructure. Rome employed political capitalism. Rather than installing a massive bureaucracy, the central government co-opted provincial elites, offering limited autonomy in exchange for funneling taxes back to the capital. The baseline taxation amounted to approximately 5% of gross product. They supplemented this with customs tolls placed on inter-provincial trade, generating immense state revenue without crushing the local economies that produced it. To process these transactions across thousands of miles, Augustus established a standardized 3-tier monetary policy, using gold for wealth storage, silver for daily wages, and bronze for local commerce, provided a universal language of value across the Mediterranean. Workers earned and paid taxes using silver denarii. The denarius is a highly standardized Roman silver coin that carried the physical stamped authority of the emperor directly into the hands of citizens at the very edges of the empire. This reliable currency standard enabled a sophisticated network of private deposit and loan institutions. Merchants could execute fiduciary financial transactions, transferring sums of wealth across the empire through credit ledgers without ever physically moving the heavy coinage.
Rome extracted wealth and maintained stability precisely because its administrative touch was remarkably light. The operating system gave local leaders a highly profitable incentive to maintain the Roman peace. The final, top layer of the stack is the software, the code of legal assimilation and cultural identity. According to Roman jurists, the fundamental legal distinction among humans was a strict binary. All people were either free, liberi, or enslaved, servi. For the free population, Rome deployed a flexible linguistic policy. While Latin was the language of the military and law, Greek was maintained as a marker of educated status, allowing the empire to integrate Eastern provincial elites rather than alienating them. This papyrus fragment documents this dual language interface in action. Here, a speech by the Roman orator Cicero is written out with parallel columns of Latin and Greek text, demonstrating how the two languages function together in daily administration. The ultimate software update arrived in AD 212 with the Constitutio Antoniana. This landmark imperial edict extended full Roman citizenship to all freeborn inhabitants. By granting equal legal protections across the board, the edict weaponized citizenship. It instantly converted millions of previously subjugated non-Romans into legal stakeholders, economically and socially invested in the survival of the state. A sophisticated legal framework provided Rome's ultimate scaling power, transforming diverse conquered populations into stakeholders who actively identified as Roman. For centuries, the standard narrative claimed the Western Roman Empire was destroyed by external barbarian invasions and religious shifts. Modern scholarship rejects that simple murder narrative. The decline was actually a centuries-long interlocking cascade failure of Rome's internal systems. The structural contraction began with the currency. To meet unrelenting military payroll demands, 3rd-century emperors systematically debased the silver coinage, stripping away its structural integrity. The resulting hyperinflation devastated the empire's credit markets. With their pay rendered worthless, the institutional loyalty of the legions fractured, leading to decades of military anarchy and civil war. This map of invasion vectors shows the physical borders becoming porous to sustained migratory pressure from Germanic peoples and Huns. The Western state allowed these armed groups to settle inside Roman territory, absorbing populations without running them through the legal assimilation software. To stop the bleeding, the administration drew this stark division line down the center of the Mediterranean in AD 395. They permanently bifurcated the empire into two distinct operating systems, the Greek East and the Latin West. Overwhelmed by populations of variable loyalty and a ruined economy, the Western Roman Empire effectively dismembered itself from the inside due to corrupted operational mechanics. The final hardware crash in the West arrived in AD 476, marked by the quiet deposition of the last emperor by a Germanic warlord. But while the West fractured into localized kingdoms, the Eastern Roman state, later known as the Byzantine Empire, successfully patched its systems and maintained the Roman apparatus for another 1,000 years. The physical proof of this endurance stands in Constantinople. The sweeping dome architecture of the Hagia Sophia represents the uninterrupted continuation of classical Roman engineering. Even in the collapsed West, the Roman software proved highly resilient. The state apparatus was gone, but the language and laws were adopted by the very successor kingdoms that replaced it. The Latin linguistic matrix stubbornly persisted through the medieval period. It eventually evolved into the Romance languages, French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian, which are spoken by hundreds of millions of people today. Roman civil law was preserved and transmitted through texts, becoming the foundational logic for global legal systems. We can see its direct lineage explicitly cited on the title page of the 1807 Code Napoleon, the French civil code that heavily influenced global jurisprudence. The Roman Empire never vanished. Its physical hardware eventually degraded, but its highly scalable source code simply became the invisible operating system of modern Western civilization.